What is up, health enthusiasts? It's Coach Lambie here for Working Weights LLC, your guide to strength, health, and all things nutrition. I'm joined as always by my co-host, Dwayne Ulrich, aka Poppy Dwirl.
Hello, welcome.
Today we're talking about GMOs.
GMO.
GMO. But first.
First.
Okay.
That's good. That's good audio too, by the way. Wait a minute. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's true too. She
That's
mentions it all the time. When he tells you no.
Perfect.
Let's see. One more. We'll do s'mores.
S'mores. Non-GMO. Yeah.
Look
Yeah.
delicious. Was that caramel?
I don't know,
One more
man.
time.
That's chocolate right there. That's a marshmallow. It looks
It's
good to
like
me.
a graham cracker that's been coated in like peanut brittle or something.
I noticed
Or
that. It kind of
maybe
had a little,
maybe it's caramel.
kind of like a glaze on it. That looks good.
Yeah. Oh,
Yum.
wild. That looks delicious.
Yes, it does.
Hmm. All right,
Yes,
man.
it does.
So getting into the GMOs.
GMO.
GMO. A lot of controversy and concern around this here. So we'll go. Of course, oh wait, no, it's working.
Yay.
I hate technology.
Hate technology. Me too.
But we're
Me
about to
too,
talk about
man.
technology. All right, so lots of concerns around GMOs. What even is that? So GMO is an abbreviation, not to be confused with an acronym, because an acronym produces a word. A lot of people don't know that.
I wasn't even thinking about it.
Yeah. Okay, so GMO stands for genetically modified organism, and that it still is used, and we see it on the packaging. You'll see non-GMO or GMO free or whatever the case may be. Um, let me share Safari. So, but there have been some, as far as like talking about it scientifically, the term GMO just seems to be kind of like a vague, nondescript thing that you can't really use because pretty much all of our food supply is GMO. There's no natural version like or everything you go into the grocery store and we've got all the produce section, you've got the meats, you got dairy, all this. Everything has been genetically modified from the original natural version. So everything we eat is genetically modified. So as far as talking about this in a scientific term, where scientists would talk about this, they've changed the term to genetically engineered. So we're talking about specifically human engineering of genes within a laboratory setting, right?
Right.
So
Right.
they changed that in about 2016. And so you'll now see, so there still is the GMO packaging, but you'll also see genetically engineered or bioengineered. You'll see that on labels now.
While you're saying that, or before you go on, what I hear, like just in the grocery store, it's amazing what you can hear in a grocery store. But in the grocery store, sometimes I hear people saying this term and GMO and non-GMO,
Mm-hmm.
and they get them confused then with. Are you ready?
Yeah.
cage free,
Oh,
and,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and free range. Oh, like, oh, no, 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 no,
Yeah,
not the
there's a lot of
thing.
confusion over all this stuff. So what's the difference between all of this stuff, right? So when we think about the produce that we have and the animals that we have for our food system, those are genetically modified organisms. So those have been uh, specific genes and specific traits have been, bred into those things um, to produce specific outcomes or specific traits over a long period of time, right? So we took oxen or wild buffalo, and eventually we have black Angus cows and we have the dairy cattle. I don't know all the breeds of cattle, whatever. You know what I mean? But it's the same thing with dogs, right? Dogs and coyotes and fox and everything have an ancestor with the wolf. And through selective breeding, we've managed to create dogs and specific traits of dogs. So if I want a big white dog, then I selectively choose dogs that are large and have white hair, right? And
Mhm.
eventually I'll get a large white dog that's all white that produces other large white dogs.
Right,
And so the same thing happens with tomatoes and potatoes and broccoli and all this stuff, right? We take some wild version of the thing and we will hybridize it with other plants to create something like broccoli, cauliflower, all that other stuff. When it comes to genetic engineering, this is actually where we'll go in and we will either introduce genes that we want or we will turn on and off genes within the plant. Okay, so like when we breed animals or try to hybridize plants or selectively um, cross pollinate plants to for specific traits, you're kind of relying on at some point just a game of luck. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and it might take multiple generations to get that trait that you're specifically looking for. But when we go into the laboratory and we're specifically introducing genes or we're turning on or off certain genes that we want, we are it except for introducing new genes, it is the same thing. We just have more control over it. Right. So instead of relying on luck, we can actually say, okay, this is the gene that's responsible for creating big, juicy tomatoes. Let's
right,
turn that on. And we also want them to taste good and be sweet, not be sour or tart. So let's turn off these other genes. Right. So we're getting
right.
exactly what we want.
So technology's just allowed us to shortcut generations of crossbreeding, etc. It
Right.
just allows us to shortcut that.
Yeah,
Um,
we're just shortcutting, decades of trial and
yes,
error.
yes,
And it just
yes,
allows us to alter those specific genes that we're looking for. But it does also allow us to introduce specific genes that we're looking for. So in terms of our crops, there may be a certain plant that produces its own natural pesticide, and it's very, very good at deterring a specific pest. And if that specific pest is attacking specific crops, then we can go and take that gene that's responsible for producing that pesticide out of one plant, put it in the other, and now we have the naturally produced pesticide from this other plant now in our crop. And so by doing that, that allows that plant to naturally produce a pesticide, and we don't have to come spray the crops
right,
with pesticides. Make sense?
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
So these are called transgenes, where they're taking it out of one and into the other. And this article here does a good job of explaining it, how we produce GM crops and all that stuff. So
yeah,
talking about people's concerns for this. So there's a couple of things that I looked up, and roughly 1/3 of Americans feel that GMOs are safe to eat, which is kind of concerning. And there was, oh, yeah, we can go to this one. Yeah. So this article is where I found that 1/3 of people, of Americans, and they get it from somewhere else. It's in a couple of things that I saw. So, but in this paragraph right here, um, this professor shows a photograph of supermarket produce to people and asks how many of the vegetables they think are genetically modified. And you get guesses as high as like 90%, but the correct answer is zero. And the reason for that is most of the GMOs that we consume are in our processed foods. It's usually corn and soy. It isn't not too much the produce that you're getting. So your lettuce and uh, strawberries and banana and all that stuff, it's not GMO in what we're thinking about as genetically engineered, right?
Right.
All right, so 1/3 of Americans feel they're unsafe to eat, and partly the reason for that is a lot of influencers or people online will say certain things. Now, we talked about the pesticide use, and there's also herbicide things, right? So the big one is going to be the use of glyphosate. All right. So we're talking about Roundup ready crops. That seems to be people's, biggest concerns. But talking about the pesticides is that if we can take a plant that naturally produces a pesticide and we can introduce that gene into another, one of our crops, then that reduces the amount of pesticide that we have to use. Okay. All right. So talking about the use of glyphosate, now we have these Roundup ready um, crops, and people are concerned with the amount of glyphosate being on them or in them. And, that is a concern. We went over that in the organic episode,
Right.
having glyphosate and all that stuff. So, um, as far as that goes, like it actually in producing these GMOs specifically for the pesticide, we're actually spraying far less chemicals on plants thanks to GMOs. Now there are we do have the glyphosate, we do have the Roundup Ready stuff, and they are using that more often. But that is to basically to kill off weeds and other plant pests, so to speak, that would be in competition with our crops. So competition of the nutrient stuff. Now, there is a concern about producing glyphosate resistant weeds. And that's fair to say. There's not a lot of evidence to suggest that that's actually happening at a large scale. But by producing these crops that are Roundup ready, so they're resistant to glyphosate. So what glyphosate does is it actually goes into the plant and it actually inhibits an enzyme that produces amino acids. And so it basically like stops the plant from growing, essentially killing it that way. And so
Right.
Roundup ready crops are just resistant to the effect of glyphosate inhibiting that enzyme. They produce a different type of enzyme instead of the one that glyphosate attacks. And so that's how they're able to do that. So by doing that, okay, and you don't have all of these by spraying the fields with glyphosate and you're reducing the amount of weeds and all the other stuff, there actually creates fields and crops that require less tillage. So there's less soil erosion. There's a lower reduction in topsoil nutrient depletion deficiencies. Okay. And it also allows us to produce more crops on a lower amount of land.
That's called saving the earth for those of you that wonder.
That's called saving the earth. Now, there is a lot of concern for American farmers supporting local farms, supporting small farmers, and all of that. I see it all the time, especially for ranchers and whatnot. And this is another aspect. I don't know that people generally would have to know this, but it's another aspect of not really knowing where your food comes from. But rightly so, people are concerned with, large swaths of cropland being sprayed with glyphosate and whatnot. However, that does allow us to produce more food on a smaller plot of land. And the economic benefits from this, so globally from GM crops between 1996 and 2016, stimulated close to $200 billion, benefiting up to 17 million farmers, of which 95% are from developing countries.
Wow. Holy moly.
So I can understand the concern that people have with large farms and all the corn and soy and everything that's being produced. Majority of that is animal feed. And then of course some of it is turned into uh what is it, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, and yada yada yada. However, GM crops, genetically engineered crops, the largest benefit. So if you actually are concerned with smaller farms, smaller farmers, and you actually are concerned with developing countries and allowing them to grow the amount of food that they need to sustain their populations and bring people out of famine and bring people out of poverty, GM crops actually benefit the smaller farmers the most. It isn't
Yeah.
the large farms that are getting the most benefit out of this. It's the
Right.
smaller farms because
Right.
they can have a larger yield on a smaller plot of land.
Right.
And then talking about, we're going to get into the health aspects of this. So the biggest concern from glyphosate, people are going to tell you online that it's, on the produce that you're eating and stuff. That isn't where the problems from these pesticides and herbicides come from. It's for the people spraying them. It's for the people who are coming in contact with large, large amounts of it. You're getting it in parts per billion when you eat something.
Right.
And
Right.
that you don't see a large effect happening there. We may just have to do an episode on glyphosate altogether, but
Yeah.
I've done lots of searches for case reports and case studies on glyphosate toxicity from food ingestion. It's practically zero. I found one case report, not to say that more don't exist, but I have found one case report of a family that developed just sort of like just a general kind of feeling of unwellness. And when they were tested for glyphosate, so urinary concentrates of glyphosate, they had really, really high levels. Now, whether that speaks to, how much of what kind of food they were getting or what they were doing at home, I don't know. But that's the only one I've been able to find. There are not reports of people coming into the emergency room or the hospital with developing cancers and tumors and blah, blah, blah. And it's traced back to consumption of glyphosate within the food supply. That's not happening. What is happening is it's the people who are out there spraying the fields, the people who are working in the factories making the stuff, the people who are you're getting it in contact with your skin or you're breathing it in because it's aerosolized in the air and stuff. That's where the concerns are. And again, so here we have growing millions of farmers, many in developing countries. The technology is providing significant economic and environmental benefits, such as reductions in chemical use of 37%.
Yep.
So
That's awesome.
GMO crops worldwide have reduced chemical use by 30%, not increased, reduced chemical use by 37%. It's increased yields by 22% and improved farm profits by 68% worldwide. And then we're talking about the smaller farms in developing countries. Okay. And these are people with less than 10 acres. Right. And field size is even smaller than that. And so the problem, the huge problem coming into those areas, and even here in the United States, you have a much smaller farmer, right, who doesn't have all the economic benefit of producing, giant fields of corn, and they have all the multi-million dollar machinery. Well, guess what? They have to go out there and they have to spray that stuff by hand. So by using a GMO crop, reducing the amount of chemicals that have to be used actually is reducing the amount of sickness and reported, adverse effects from these things. So
Right.
the biggest benefits are coming to the people who need it the most.
That's all good information. I like the part where you were talking about, like, for the average consumer, like a glyphosate is like in parts per billion,
Mm.
or is it parts per million? Parts per
Parts per
million.
billion. It's in parts
Billion.
per billion. Yes.
Holy
The
moly.
amount, yeah, the glyphosate that you're getting in the food supply is in parts per billion.
But just so I don't know how many people actually know anything about spraying crops or so forth. Guys with smaller fields, sometimes if they're big enough, they'll have a tractor with a sprayer on it, which is usually okay. It's better, especially if you have a cab on your tractor that you can be isolated from. Smaller fields, 10 acres or less. At best, you're going to use a tractor. If not, you're going to have guys out there spraying it by hand. And in some countries in um, I don't want to say third world, but in third world countries, you just get the stuff, you get the spray, and you just go out there and spray it. And then these guys don't take they don't have, maybe they don't have the personal protective, equipment, the PPE to wear,
That's exactly
or,
right.
or or to protect themselves from it because they're such a small producer.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. They
I mean,
can't afford the PPE. They can't afford the safety equipment. They can't afford
yeah,
all of that. What they have is a hand pump sprayer, and they're out there
right,
in the crops in shorts and sandals and a tank
right,
top, something
right,
they wear every single day
right,
for the
right,
last 10 years because they can't
right.
afford to buy clothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
some people's initial concept, there's an initial thought of when you're spraying crops, the first thing they think about is crop dusters, and even at that is much more protected. For the pilot,
Hmm.
but the only contact he or she may have is when they load their hopper on their plane, the tank, about getting it on them. But they take great precautions not to do that. So the smaller fields, the smaller producers, which are a huge, huge part of the food supply, yeah, they're out there doing it by hand. Yeah, my wife has she's a gardening queen, and she's out there, like, she's got to use a certain product for this, certain product for that, and certain insect here and certain insect there. And she goes to great precautions to protect herself from even having contact with that. But that's not the way it is down in other countries, or even some of the lower income areas of the United States, which we're not going to name now. But yeah, that's what's happening.
Yeah, so we have reductions in farmer pesticide poisonings. Those have been quantified in China, India, Pakistan, and South Africa. So again, developing countries, high amounts of poverty, high amounts of malnutrition and famine. And here now they're not talking about edible crops, but they are talking about a BT cotton. And I forget what BT is. It's a bacteria, and that basically has that pesticide in there. So the farmers reduced pesticide applications from 11.2 per year to 3.8. So instead of having to spray their fields 11 times a year, they only have to spray them 4 times a year. And reported cases of pesticide poisoning declining from over 50 per year
Wow.
to less than 10
Wow.
within the first 4 years.
Awesome.
Yes. So the idea that um, that GMO crops means that we are now putting more chemicals on the fields is not upheld within the scientific literature. And the idea that that then results in more cancer is not upheld in the scientific literature. So what is available to us, what we actually know about as far as the amount of chemicals put onto the fields and the amount of chemicals people come in contact with is it is actually less, resulting in less cancer and less poisoning. We also have less amount of farmer suicide.
That's a subject that nobody hears about, nobody knows about. It's yeah,
Right. And part of that maybe because of the lack of or the the decline in exposure to these chemicals, but then you also have the economic side of that as well. So, you're a farmer, you're trying to produce crops, you have a wave of whatever bugs come through, destroy something, and now, you know what I mean? Like many people don't realize just how much it costs in equipment and buying seeds or whatever, all the other things that goes into producing crops. And a lot of times farmers will have to go out and they'll have to get a loan in order to buy everything that they need to produce a crop for this season, whatever that may be. And if you go out and you get that loan, especially if you are a smaller farmer, especially if you are in a developing country, and you get that and you get just bombarded with caterpillars that destroy everything, now you're out all of that.
yeah,
And
when,
that can
yeah,
be a huge burden on your family, you know what I mean?
yeah, with no way to pay that back. Yeah, the whole farming industry is not well understood by non-farmers. They don't understand it.
Yeah.
Farmers
So,
aren't in the business of they're not farmers because they think they're going to make it rich.
mhm.
They're just not. It's a passion. It's what they know. It's what their families have known typically, and
Yeah.
they get by. Some of them do well, but they're not.
You
Yeah, do
will
farmers
see
make money? Some do, but not.
some
It's not
do.
what you think. It's not
Yeah.
the
And you'll
rolling
see
money
net
thing.
Yeah, you'll see net worth reportings of farms, and especially if they sell corn or soy, and you'll see net worths and they're, multi-millions of dollars. But the problem is that people don't understand that's all tied up in equipment. It's
Yeah,
equipment and land and the silos and everything required to store all of that. Like the farmer, he's not worth that. All of the equipment and everything that's required to
yeah,
produce those crops, that's where the net value is.
yeah,
A combine harvester is like, holy smokes, it's almost triple digit millions.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Absolutely.
a lot of them are coming out now. They have GPS. So it used to be, I watched a really interesting documentary a few years ago where it used to be, and I've been in a tractor. My mom worked for a crop duster. I've been around this as a kid, and I've actually been in the tractor when they go and they actually plow the fields, and you're creating the rows that are, you're going to come and plant the seeds and all that stuff. And so it used to be that you would drive the tractor and you would start to get these little, right, as you are driving the first row, you get these little deviations. As you continue to make row, that deviation becomes bigger. Well, that reduces the square footage of plantable land that you do,
Yes,
having all these deviations. And so now
yes,
they have tractors that have GPS and they actually can set, so the rows are much straighter. You'll notice this when you drive down the highway and you see crops and the rows are like laser straight, right? So that increases the amount of yield that the crop land can produce because now you don't have those deviations. By the time you get to the end of the row, you've lost quite a bit of plantable land. And then they also are working on AI and using lasers instead of coming through with pesticide to get rid of weeds and stuff. And so the same tractor will be driven by GPS. That'll all be guided by AI. And then they're pulling a thing on the back of it that actually is going over the ground. It's scanning all the plants on the ground. AI is determining what is crop and what is weed, and it's using lasers or there's something else, maybe CO2 or something to kill the plants. That stuff costs
a fortune,
a
massive.
fortune.
Yeah, and while you're saying that, people always talk about, oh, we're all this money is going to farm subsidies,
Yeah.
and blah blah blah. Oh, and they're paying farmers not to grow crops.
Hmm.
Well, you just don't understand. You just don't understand. It's crazy.
Yep. All
Yeah,
right. So
go buy a trio of combines and see what that costs you.
yeah, see what one costs. One of them.
Yep.
All right, getting into some of the health concerns. Now we talked about the cancer coming from um, the pesticides and herbicides and the chemicals that are being sprayed on. And as far as what's that is coming to you in the food supply, what you'll hear online is that, well, the cancer rates are increasing, so the number of cancer incidents is increasing every year. And while that is true, the largest contribution to that is coming from developing nations. So as these nations start to become more and more um, wealthy, and they're now able to get involved and buy some of the pesticides and the other chemicals that we take for granted on a daily basis, now they're being exposed to that stuff a little bit more often. We also have higher um, lifespans. People are living longer. People are living long enough now, especially in developing nations, where they can develop cancers.
Yeah. 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 It's amazing for some people to think about this, or well, they don't know this, but there are countries not too far from the United States, as a matter of fact, where in communities even uh, at a granular level that the average life expectancy is 30 to 34 years old. And that may blow people's mind, and they're going, "Oh, Dwayne, Poppy Dwirl, you're just saying that." No, I've done missions work in places where the average lifespan was 34 years old. So they're not going to develop much cancers in 34 years old. What kills them is dysentery,
Yeah.
disease, foodborne parasites that kill them. So yeah, the better health that we bring to third world countries, and even even some parts of the United States, we bring the health we bring there allows them to grow to live longer. And in living longer, a lot of times you're going to see the development of cancers and diseases that are particular to older people.
Hmm.
I completely agree with what you said, Coach. Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, so as far as like GMO uh plant, it's mostly crops that people are concerned about. As far as those actually causing cancer, independent of the pesticides or whatever. So this article again, pretty good stuff here. So we've been eating these foods for decades. All right. So this researcher, Mr. Gould here, we've been eating these for decades, and people generally consume less of them overseas. So GMOs are produced less overseas, and it's mostly in U.S. and Canada. And if there were some health outcome or cancer related outcome that was specific to GMOs, not to anything else, then we should be seeing that, and we don't. We don't see any difference in those things. Um, Now he does go on to say that the scientific community is very careful not to say that there are no effects from eating GMO foods, but just that we haven't found those effects. Is not to say that later on something might develop, all right, but just that we have not found them. If that was, if GMOs were causing these things, you would expect to see a difference in those specific things in countries like the United States and Canada who consume more GMOs versus Europe, India, Pakistan, all that stuff. And we don't see those things. And another good point to this is that people will say we're consuming more GMOs, the rates of cancer are increasing, therefore, blah, blah, blah. When we use the word cancer, Cancer is an umbrella term for a category of disease, right? There are, we've said it before, I think you looked it up. There's like 100 different types of lymphoma. Now, if you're going to say that GMO foods are causing cancer, which cancer is it specifically? You can't just say cancer.
Right.
And point to cancer rates because that includes things like breast cancer, colon cancer, lung cancer. That's all of those things that fit under the umbrella of cancer, right? Hodgkin's lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, melanomas. There are several types of melanomas. Point to the specific cancer that you think GMOs are causing and show me the evidence that that is the case. So people want to use these vague, broad terms, right? And then point
Right.
to ecological data and say, well, this must be the case. No, there is no specific cancer, nor is there any specific disease-related outcome that is supposedly attributed to GMO. Nobody can name those things. It's all just generic, broad, vague things. All right.
For some people, that may be a tough pill to swallow, but you just have to understand that some cancers are only caused by specific things. And so if you
Mm-hmm.
just blanketly say a cancer out there, which, oh my gosh, we're using the word cancer, but just, you pick out it's cancers are being caused by GMO products. Which cancer? Which
Yeah.
cancer? And just like Coach was saying, another thing I want to point out too is that um, farmers stake this is their livelihood, and yeah, they're going to fight for their livelihood. They want it. This is what they do. Like I told you before, is that this is what's bred into them. It's farmers don't. It's not like Green Acres where the guy leaves Park Avenue and decides he wants to be a farmer.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen. Maybe one in a million, okay? But that's not the main thing. That doesn't happen very often. The point being is a farmer's not going to use a GMO seed line, a product. He's not going to grow that product unless it's been tested. They don't just go in and manufacture a GMO. All right, let's grow it and eat it. There is specific testing that goes on.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that right now.
Good. How did I lead that in?
Yeah, it is uncanny your ability to segue.
I'm a Minson.
Yeah, so another health concern that people have, and again, look, these are legitimate concerns to have, okay? But when what we have to do is we have to go in and we have to actually look at the evidence and then evaluate on the spaces. So another thing is asthma, okay?
Oh yeah.
Doing my you know, lead up into this podcast and looking at what's being said about GMOs online in the social media sphere, asthma was a big concern. Okay. And as far as asthma goes and like the increased rates of asthma, I have heard everything under the sun that you can think of being attributed to asthma. People will attribute everything. Pasteurization of milk, they attribute to asthma. We have the GMO crops is attributed to asthma. Uh, Not sunning your butthole. I've heard that one attributed to asthma. So, yeah.
I'm gonna mute myself.
All right. So people are concerned about asthma coming from GM crops. Now, here's the thing is before getting FDA approval, okay, and this is the FDA website, when a produce or whatever the case may be is genetically modified, it has to go through testing, like you said. One of those testings, right, may include, but are not limited to, significantly increased levels of plant toxins or anti-nutrients, reductions of important nutrients, and new allergens. All the GM crops are tested for allergenicity. So, on the basis that these crops are introducing new allergens, they are not. They are tested for it. All right. So that should, it probably won't, but that should be able to chop that off at the
Yeah, at the
base there.
root, at the root,
Yeah,
at
these
the
things
root.
are being tested for allergenicity. They
You know,
are.
the asthma thing, of course, you threw me really hard there. I was like, whoa, I'm going to start laughing if I think about it. I have asthma.
Hmm.
And I can tell you right now that a lot of people that think they have asthma don't really have asthma. So, there's allergy induced asthma out there, yes. But more often than not, a lot of folks that say they have asthma don't realize that it's not really asthma that they have. They may have an allergic reaction to something. It's not, they're not actually going through the asthma situation. Am I saying that somebody who out there who's listening to us, well, I have asthma, I know. Okay, but the GMO products, like Coach is saying, is not generating additional allergens that weren't already there. So reevaluate, just reevaluate, read the data, go see
Yeah.
your doctor.
Yeah, they're being tested for allergens. They're certainly being tested for new allergens, and they are being tested for allergenicity. Do these things actually increase the rates of allergies and asthma? Okay. Most of that's done in rodent research. Now, talking about the rodent research, where people are um, supporting their claims is through rodent research, right? Which I find to be oddly, I don't know if I can quite say it's hypocritical, but like you have problems with GMOs. Oh, we shouldn't have GMOs, blah, 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 because they're genetically modified. We don't know what's happening. But to back that up, here's some genetically modified rodents.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Hypocritical? Hypocritical?
Yeah. So talking about that research specifically, I gotta wait for this thing to get out of my way. All right, so GMO toxicity and fears and the scientific analysis. So most of the research that people are going to cite is going to be rodent research. They're not going to cite human data. What human data they do cite is going to be ecological in nature. Rates of cancer have gone up. The amount of GMOs we consume in the food system have gone up. Two things correlate, therefore X caused Y. That's not how that works, okay? And so they'll cite the rodent research. And so what I've found here, this is a fantastic little article that talks about um, where a lot of these concerns are coming from, the specific studies that people are citing. And most of it has to do with tomatoes and potatoes that they gave to mice. And so they either tested like whether or not there was quote unquote damage to the organs or the brain or some kind of system within the body. So the lymphic system, endocrine system, whatever the case may be, or the aspect of fertility. So, do generations of mice and rats consuming these things tend to develop, issues over time? Does the third generation of this uh, uh, group of rodents have more cancer than the initial one? All that stuff. So, there is a reference within this article to another article, okay, about these GMO tomatoes, where the person who wrote the article that a lot of people are citing as there was damage to the organs, basically lied about the study.
Wow, wow,
Yeah, and so the damage that happened to the organs didn't come it was all in the study, didn't come from the actual consumption of GMOs, but it actually came from the way that the researchers were like sticking tubes into the rodent stomachs and stuff.
wow, wow.
So good stuff here. You guys go check that out. I'll be sure to link these things. And Another aspect to these rodent studies is I have seen levels of GMO consumption that would be on the order of like 7,000 times the amount that human beings consume on a daily basis. So
Mm,
they're feeding rodents up to 7,000 times the amount. Okay.
that's
And then,
massive.
yeah, and I think it's in this one as well. Interestingly, eating too many tomatoes can kill rats. And so this study showed how difficult whole food feeding studies are to do. The amount of tomatoes rats were fed was equivalent to a human being eating 10 to 20 large tomatoes a day.
Mm,
And other studies have concluded that 13 tomatoes a day are sufficient to kill about half of the rats because tomatoes contain a lot of potassium, and too much potassium can be lethal.
if you're eating 10 to 20 tomatoes a day, something's wrong with you. So, uh, man, can you imagine that indigestion for crying out loud? That is, if you live past the potassium poisoning.
Oh, I can find that again. Yeah, so on the basis of citing these rodent research, so a lot of it is people are blatantly lying, people are misinterpreting things, people are only reading abstracts and conclusions and then filling in the rest of the blanks with their imagination. And then as it turns out, like too much of a certain nutrient, lo and behold, the dosage makes the poison. Yeah, too much potassium can kill an organism.
Right, right, right. Absolutely.
All right. So we get into the genetic mutation aspect of this as well. And so some of the things that I've heard online is there's concern that the mutated genes, as we consume them, can have an effect on our genes. And again, there's no evidence to suggest that this is happening. This happens. This is just like a slippery slope fallacy that happens here. All right. Um, so the thought is that these mutated genes within the plant will mutate our genes. Okay. Now, I want people to think about this logically here. So they're they're not going in and creating mutants in the way that we think of like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the movies. That's not what mutation means. So a albinoism is mutation, right?
Right.
Not to say that that mutation is inherently bad, but that is a genetic mutation. Okay. So if you were to consume some genes that had a mutation or genes that we specifically turn on to express certain traits, and that could affect your genes, let's think about something. As people eat beef, cows have the genes to express the development of hooves and horns, right?
Right.
Do people walk around eating beef and start developing hooves and horns? No. Just because you're eating something that has genes or those genes have a mutation does not mean that that genetic mutation is going to be expressed in your genes. That's not how this works. If that was the case, I mean, you would think about it. Just think about it. People would be walking around with hooves and horns. You would be growing leaves out of your appendages. Like this just is silly. That's just silly nonsense. Yeah. Another concern that I heard about here is antibiotic resistance, antibiotic resistant bacteria. So when they go in and they do transgenic, they're introducing genes from one plant to another. They will introduce antibiotic resistant bacteria or antibiotic resistant genes. What these are markers. So as the plant grows, the specific genes that we introduced that will cause a mutation within the plant, the specific mutation that we're looking for, which would be expression of a specific pesticide, now have that marker. So they can go in and see which genes have actually adopted that mutation because it has that antibacterial resistant or antibiotic resistant marker on it. And then the thought here is that I haven't seen any research, but I did watch a video where a guy said that there has been testing done where people will eat GMOs, and so the antibiotic resistant genes have an effect on our gut bacteria, making them antibiotic resistant. And they were concerned about that. And I found that to be interesting because the very same person, as I looked up their profile on Instagram, seems to have an issue with taking antibiotics. Why? Specifically because antibiotics just go in and destroy all of the bacteria. So if you take antibiotics, they say that it destroys all of your gut bacteria. Now, if the antibiotic resistant genes were causing your gut bacteria to become antibiotic, wouldn't that be beneficial in the case of taking antibiotics?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, they didn't think that through. Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't think that through. All right. Another aspect to this is that there are a number of medications that we have today that are life saving that come from genetically engineered organisms. One of them is insulin. Insulin is made from a genetically engineered bacteria. It produces all the things we need to make synthetic insulin. Okay. Another one of them are anticlonal cancer treatments, come from genetically engineered bacteria. I would like to see someone make the case that anti how do you say the word? Anticlonal, whatever it is. Anyways, insulin and these cancer treatments are causing asthma or they're causing cancer. Do you think cancer treatment is causing cancer? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Come on. Right. And then the same people who will have an issue with diabetics who take insulin say, well, you need to switch to this other thing. So we stop taking this insulin. Will never say the insulin is causing all these problems, right? It's the whatever carbohydrates that you're consuming is causing the problems. Obesity is the thing that's causing. They'll never attribute it to the insulin. Insulin is the thing that's helping those people.
That's a person that doesn't truly understand what diabetes is.
Yes.
They don't really get that. So
There are also, I don't know if this is out in the world right now, but I did see it. Maybe I have it. Ooh, ooh, ooh. This would be great if I do this. No. Okay, I don't have it. All right. They are developing genetically engineered mosquito populations.
oh my gosh.
Mosquito
Oh,
populations that have the genetics turned off or turned on, can't remember which one it is, but inhibits the development of malaria and West Nile virus.
okay. What about all the mosquitoes that aren't genetically engineered? Oh my gosh.
Well, so by doing this, by taking the mosquito populations from a certain region and introducing genetically engineered mosquitoes, right? That same mosquito that's native to that population. And those mosquitoes now cannot pass on malaria or West Nile. The amount of disease from malaria and West Nile will go down significantly, right?
Right.
Now, you can be concerned all you want that because we turned on or off specific genes, and again, those same people don't seem to have a problem with genetically altered rodents to support their claims, right? But they'll have an issue with genetically altered mosquitoes in an attempt to reduce the amount of malaria. So there seems to be not a great deal of thought happening in these concerns for genetic organisms.
Some people will they're going to pick a flag or a hill to stand on, and no matter what. Crazy.
Yeah. Well, sowing fear gets clicks and brings
Yes,
in
it
revenue.
does. Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
All right. So for the TLDR here, in terms of the amount of chemicals used, do GMOs increase or decrease the amount of chemicals that we're being exposed to? They decrease it by almost
Decrease.
40%.
Yep.
Almost 40% of chemicals that would otherwise be used on crops, they decrease it. In terms of how much food can be produced from GMO crops by using GMO crops, they increase. They
Yep.
increase the amount of revenue going to farmers. And who benefits the most from reduced pesticide use and increased crops is the smaller farmers,
Right.
and specifically the ones in developing countries.
Right.
All right. We didn't get to not being allowed in organic. So we talked about organic farming. There's not you can't use GMO crops, so you can neither grow GMO crops nor can you feed GMO crops to the animals that are certified organic. Now, on that basis, there is no scientific basis as to why that regulation exists. There is a historic basis for that, but there's no scientific basis. All right. The reason there's no scientific basis is because
There's no
GMO
science.
crops, GMO crops don't seem to produce any different results
Right.
than organically grown crops
Right.
or conventionally grown crops.
Right.
All right. So the historic basis on that is just that, well, we've tended to use these more, what's the word? I don't want to say more natural, for a lack of a better term. I forget what it is. More natural methods of producing crops and animals. Okay. And that's the reason. It's just a historical reference. This is the way that we consider something to be quote unquote organic. Not that there's a scientific reason not to allow GMOs in that type for something to be certified organic. In terms of cancer, until someone can produce otherwise, GM crops seem to reduce the incidence of cancer, specifically coming from the people who are responsible for spraying the crops, right?
Yes.
There is no increased incident of cancer from consuming them, and there is no one specific cancer or even several cancers that anyone can attribute specifically to the consumption of GMOs. On the basis of asthma, GMOs are tested for allergenicity, and one of those allergens is asthma. These things are not out there causing asthma.
Right.
There isn't evidence for a direct link to that. And in terms of genetic mutations, whether these things are going to cause you to experience genetic mutations, no, right? Because you're eating genetically mutated or genes that have mutations when you consume beef, chicken, even plants and vegetables and fruits. The genes in the vegetables and fruits have mutations as well. You're not developing yellow skin because you ate bananas.
Yep.
You're not developing a sweet, juicy inside because you eat flavor saver tomatoes. Those things aren't happening. All right. So don't be alarmed. The GMO crops are not a huge concern. We've said it before. I'm going to say it again. We live in a time where we have the safest food supply that we have ever had in the history of the world.
Right.
All right. Well, I guess that's all I got on that. Hope some minds were blown. I hope you guys get something out of this. And Coach Lambie and Dwayne out.
Bye, guys.